She answered the call in French in front of the billionaire, and hours later he said, "Bring her to me." No one in that room understood why a simple phone call could freeze a powerful man in his tracks. But her voice sounded exactly like the wife he lost years ago. What starts as a normal work shift for a young server becomes a terrifying twist of fate when the billionaire demands to meet her. Alone. But the moment he looks at her, something in his world cracks open, and a dangerous secret, buried for decades, begins to rise. Someone close to him will do anything to keep the truth hidden, even if it means stopping her from ever finding out who she really is. If her voice woke up a memory he tried to bury, what will happen when he discovers the truth everyone else is desperate to destroy? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The elegant notes of a string quartet drifted through the grand ballroom of the Napa Valley estate, where crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over hundreds of wealthy donors in their finest evening wear. Etienne Marchand stood near the center of the room, his tailored black tuxedo a stark contrast to his silver-streaked dark hair. Though he nodded politely as guests approached with their checkbooks open, his pewter-grey eyes remained distant, carrying the same heaviness they'd held for the past 7 years. He mechanically signed another donor card, his fountain pen scratching across the heavy cardstock. "Your continued support means everything to our children's literacy initiative," he said, though the words felt hollow in his throat. Since losing Colette, even his most passionate charitable causes had lost their spark. Across the room, Vivienne Dupré carefully wove between clusters of chattering guests, her black uniform pressed crisp and neat despite hours of service. She balanced a silver tray of empty champagne flutes with practiced grace, keeping her movements fluid and unobtrusive. The gentle vibration of her phone against her hip made her pause. Usually she never answered during events, but her mother's health had been declining, and worry made her break protocol. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, Vivienne slipped behind a heavy velvet curtain near the donor table. The fabric muffled the party's noise as she pulled out her phone and answered in a whispered voice. "Oui, Madame Rousseau. Comment va ma mère aujourd'hui?" The familiar cadence of her Parisian French filled the small space, her voice carrying the same musical lilt that had once echoed through these very halls. At the donor table just feet away, Etienne's hand froze mid-signature. The champagne flute he'd been holding slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that made nearby guests jump. But he didn't notice their startled expressions or the spreading puddle of champagne at his feet. All he could hear was that voice, that impossible voice, speaking the same gentle French that had once been the soundtrack to his happiest days. "Monsieur Marchand?" A concerned board member touched his elbow. "Are you all right?" Etienne couldn't answer. His heart hammered against his ribs as he strained to hear more of the hidden conversation, but the voice had already fallen silent. He watched as a young woman in catering blacks emerged from behind the curtain, her head bowed as she hurried back to her duties. Though he caught only a glimpse of her face, the elegant line of her neck and the way she moved with unconscious grace made his chest ache with memories. The next hour passed in a blur. Etienne went through the motions of bidding guests farewell, but his eyes kept tracking the catering server as she efficiently cleared tables and packed away equipment. There was something about her, something that tugged at the ragged edges of his grief in a way nothing had for 7 years. As the last guests departed and the cleaning crew began their work, Etienne found himself standing in his private office overlooking the emptying ballroom. He watched the young woman gathering her things, preparing to leave for the night. His fingers traced the gold wedding band he still wore as he pressed the intercom button. "Marcus," he said quietly to his head of security. "Bring her to me." "Sir." Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker. "The catering server with the French accent. Please ask her to come to my office before she leaves." Etienne's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he released the button. Down in the ballroom, Vivian was sliding her phone into her bag when a tall man in a dark suit approached her. "Miss Dupré?" His tone was professional but kind. "Mr. Marchand would like to speak with you before you go." Vivian's stomach dropped. Had someone complained about her answering her phone during the event? She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her mother's medical bills piling up. "Of course," she said softly, smoothing her hands over her uniform. "Did Mr. Marchand say what this was regarding?" The security chief shook his head. "This way, please." As they climbed the curved staircase to the executive level, Vivian tried to calm her racing thoughts. She'd been so careful all evening, except for that one moment of weakness with the phone call. Would it cost her everything? The medical updates about her mother had been good today. She'd finally started responding to the new treatment, but those treatments weren't cheap. Vivian needed every hour of work she could get. They stopped before a heavy wooden door, and Marcus knocked twice before opening it. "Miss Dupré, sir." Vivian stepped into the warmly lit office, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the moonlit vineyard beyond. But it was the man standing at those windows who commanded her attention, tall and distinguished, with an air of carefully contained power that made the spacious office feel suddenly smaller. When Etienne turned to face her, Vivian was struck by the intensity of his gaze. His eyes seemed to search her face for something, though she couldn't imagine what. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions, until Vivian couldn't bear it any longer. "Sir," she began hesitantly, "if this is about the phone call I took during the event, I sincerely apologize. It was unprofessional, but it was about my mother's health, and You speak French." It wasn't a question. His voice was low and slightly rough, as if the words had been dragged from somewhere deep inside him. Vivian blinked, thrown by the unexpected direction. "Yes, sir. I grew up in Paris until I was 10. Something flickered across his face. Pain or recognition, she couldn't tell which. He took a step closer, and Vivian noticed his hand was shaking as he reached for the back of a leather chair, gripping it as if for support. "Your accent," he said, still staring at her with that unsettling intensity. "It's pure Parisian, the specific cadence, the way you form your vowels." He trailed off, seeming to struggle with something internal. "I haven't heard French spoken quite that way in 7 years. Vivian shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. She'd always been proud of her perfect French, a gift from her mother who had insisted she maintain it even after they moved to America. But something about the way this powerful man was looking at her made her feel exposed, as if her voice had revealed something she hadn't meant to share. "Mr. Marchand?" she said carefully. "I'm not sure I understand why I'm here." He seemed to catch himself then, drawing back slightly and straightening his shoulders. The mask of the controlled businessman slipped back into place, though his eyes remained turbulent. "No, I suppose you wouldn't." He paused, then added more formally, "Thank you for coming up. That will be all for now." Dismissed as abruptly as she'd been summoned, Vivian made her way back down to the service area, her mind whirling with questions. She gathered her belongings in a daze, replaying the strange interaction in her head. It wasn't until she was climbing into her worn Honda Civic that she realized she still had her job. Whatever that mysterious meeting had been about, at least it hadn't ended with her being fired. Above, in his office, Etienne Marchand stood at his windows long after her taillights had disappeared down the winding drive. He pulled out his phone and pressed a single number on his speed dial. When it connected, He spoke without preamble. I need you to find out everything you can about a Vivian Dupré. She works for Valley Elite Catering. He paused, then added more quietly. And I need you to pull the security footage from tonight. Want to hear her voice again. The heavy mahogany door closed behind them with a soft click as the security chief led Vivian into what appeared to be a private tasting room. Crystal glasses lined the shelves, catching the warm light from ornate wall sconces. A long table of polished wood dominated the center, its surface so pristine it reflected the light like still water. "Please, wait here," the security chief said before stepping out, leaving Vivian alone with her growing anxiety. She wiped her damp palms against her black apron, trying to steady her nerves. The room, though beautiful, felt too formal, too important for someone like her. Every surface spoke of wealth and tradition, from the centuries-old wine bottles displayed in temperature-controlled cases to the oil paintings of French vineyards that adorned the walls. The door opened again, and Etienne Marchand entered. Up close, Vivian could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of command, yet there was something almost fragile in the way he watched her, as if she were a mirage that might vanish at any moment. "Would you?" he began, then cleared his throat. "Would you please say something in French for me?" Vivian blinked, caught off guard by the unusual request. "What would you like me to say?" "Anything. Perhaps." He paused, seeming to search for words. "Tell me about your favorite memory of Paris." Vivian nodded slowly, still confused but willing to comply. "Mon souvenir préféré de Paris est de marcher le long de la Seine avec ma mère, regardant les bateaux passer sous les ponts while sharing a fresh baguette." The words flowed naturally, her accent pure and unaffected. Etienne's hand shot out to grip the back of a nearby chair, his knuckles white against the dark wood. "My God," he whispered. "It's identical. The exact same inflection, the same musical quality." He took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose himself. "Your mother? You said she taught you French?" "Yes," Vivian replied, switching back to English. "She was from Paris originally. She made sure I grew up speaking both languages, even after we moved to America." "And your mother?" He hesitated. "Is she still—" "She passed away 2 years ago," Vivian said quietly, the familiar ache of loss tightening her chest. "Cancer." Something that looked like disappointment flickered across his face, quickly masked. "I'm sorry for your loss. Did you spend your whole childhood in Paris?" "No, we moved around quite a bit, actually." Vivian's brow furrowed as she recalled those early years. "We lived in several places, including Napa Valley for one season when I was very young. I remember because we lived near a vineyard. My mother used to walk me along the rows of grapevines in the evening, teaching me their French names." The change in Etienne was immediate and dramatic. He went, absolutely still, like a man who had just spotted a snake in his path. "When?" The word came out sharp, almost desperate. "What year?" Vivian took a small step back, startled by his intensity. "I must have been around 7 or 8, so 19 years ago. It was just for one season, late summer through early fall." Etienne turned away abruptly, moving to stare out the window into the darkness. His reflection in the glass showed a face tight with some emotion Vivian couldn't name. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. When he finally spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Miss Dupré, I have a rather unusual request. Would you be willing to return tomorrow morning? There's something I'd like to show you." Vivian hesitated. "I'm scheduled to work another event tomorrow." I'll compensate you for any lost wages, of course," he said quickly. "Double them, in fact. And I assure you, this is important." Vivian thought of her mounting medical bills, of her mother's treatments that had drained her savings. "What time would you like me to come?" 9 o'clock? He turned back to face her, and there was something almost pleading in his expression. "Please, I wouldn't ask if it weren't significant." She nodded slowly. "All right, 9 o'clock. Thank you." He pressed a button on the wall, and moments later the security chief reappeared. "Marcus will show you out through the staff entrance." As Vivian followed Marcus through the quiet corridors of the massive house, her mind was whirling. Why had Mr. Marchand reacted so strongly to her French? And what about her childhood memory of the vineyard had affected him so deeply? The cool night air hit her face as she stepped out of the staff entrance, the gravel crunching beneath her feet. It was nearly midnight, and the vineyard stretched out before her like a dark ocean, the rows of vines creating shadowy waves in the moonlight. As she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted tonight, as if her mother's carefully buried past was somehow rising to the surface, bringing with it questions she had never thought to ask. Looking back at the grand house, she saw a single light still burning in an upstairs window. Somewhere up there, Etienne Marchand was probably still awake, holding on to whatever secret had made him so desperate to speak with her again tomorrow. For the first time in years, Vivian felt truly connected to the mystery of her mother's life, the parts she had never shared, the stories she had taken to her grave. She got into her car, her hands trembling slightly as she inserted the key. The engine rumbled to life, and as she drove away from the estate, her mother's voice seemed to echo in her memory, teaching her the French names of grapes in a vineyard very much like this one, 19 years ago. The morning sun had barely risen when Vivian stepped off the bus at the vineyard entrance. She pulled her light sweater closer, protecting herself against the early autumn chill. Her night had been restless, filled with fragments of dreams about her mother and questions that kept her tossing and turning until dawn. The security guard from the previous night, Marcus, was waiting for her at the gate. He gave her a gentle smile and gestured for her to follow. "Mr. Marchand is expecting you in the archive room." As they walked through the grounds, Vivian took in the magnificent estate in the daylight. Rows of carefully tended grapevines stretched as far as she could see, their leaves dancing in the morning breeze. The main house stood proud against the backdrop of rolling hills, its limestone walls glowing golden in the early light. Marcus led her through a side entrance and down a corridor lined with vintage wine posters and old photographs. They stopped at a heavy wooden door, which he opened with a respectful nod. "Right through here, Miss Dupré." The archive room took Vivian's breath away. It was like stepping into a museum dedicated to the art of winemaking. Glass cases held ancient-looking tools and bottles. Framed photographs covered the walls, showing the vineyard's evolution through the decades. The air held the musty sweetness of old paper and wood. Etienne Marchand stood at a large table in the center of the room, surrounded by photo albums and boxes of documents. He looked up as she entered, and Vivian noticed the dark circles under his eyes. Had he slept as poorly as she had? "Thank you for coming, Miss Dupré," he said, his voice carrying a hint of nervous energy she hadn't heard the night before. "I spent most of the night going through our records from that season you mentioned." Vivian approached the table carefully, her heart beating faster with each step. "Did you find something?" "I believe I did." He gestured to several photo albums spread out before him. "These are our harvest documentation photos from 19 years ago. We keep detailed records of each season, the workers, the weather conditions, the yield." He opened one of the albums, and Vivian leaned in to look. The pages were filled with photographs of people working in the vineyard, picking grapes, operating equipment, sorting harvests. Some posed, others caught in candid moments. Etienne's fingers trembled slightly as he turned the pages. The timing matches exactly with what you told me. That season was significant. My wife, Colette, had gone away for what she said was a period of rest. She stayed here at our Napa property while I remained at our main estate in France. He paused at a page, and Vivian's heart nearly stopped. There, in a group photo of workers sorting grapes, was her mother. She would have recognized that familiar head wrap anywhere, the way she always tied it with a precise knot at the front, the fabric's pattern of tiny blue flowers. Her mother's shy smile was exactly as Vivian remembered it, though younger than in her own memories. "That's her," Vivian whispered, touching the photo gently. "That's my mother." Etienne's breath caught. He was staring at the photograph with an intensity that made Vivian look closer. And then she saw what had captured his attention. Standing next to her mother was an elegant woman with honey blonde hair and kind eyes. But what made Vivian's hands begin to shake was the woman's clearly rounded belly, visible even in the loose dress she wore. "That's Colette," Etienne said, his voice rough with emotion. "My wife, and she's pregnant in this photo. She never told me she was expecting during that time. She came back to France 2 months later and never mentioned—" He trailed off, and Vivian felt the room spin slightly. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. The implications of what they were seeing seemed too enormous to process. "Ms. Dupré, Vivian," Etienne said softly, turning to face her. "I know this is overwhelming, and I don't want to jump to conclusions. But given the timing, and the remarkable similarity in your voice to Colette's—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you be willing to consider a DNA comparison? Only if you're comfortable, of course. I would arrange everything privately, with complete discretion." Vivian stared at the photograph, at her mother's young face next to the pregnant woman who could be. Her mind struggled to complete the thought. "Yes," she heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I think we need to know." Etienne nodded, relief and anxiety warring on his face. "Thank you. I'll make the arrangements immediately." Vivian took one last look at the photograph, at these two women whose secrets had shaped her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. Then she turned and walked out of the archive room on unsteady legs, stepping into the bright vineyard sunlight. The warmth hit her face, but she barely felt it. Her entire world had tilted on its axis, and she didn't know if it would ever right itself again. The possibility that had been unspoken in that room followed her like a shadow, that her identity, her very understanding of who she was, might be about to change forever. The vines stretched out before her, the same ones her mother had walked among all those years ago, carrying what might have been the biggest secret of all. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds in Etienne's private office as he made the call. His fingers drummed nervously on his antique mahogany desk while he waited for his contact at the private medical facility to answer. "Dr. Chen's office," a discreet voice answered. "This is Etienne Marchand. I need to arrange a confidential DNA comparison test. Today, if possible." After making the arrangements, Etienne buzzed for his assistant, Sarah, who had been with the family for over 15 years. She appeared moments later, her grey hair neatly pinned back, carrying the small evidence collection kit the lab had courier delivered. "Miss Dupré is waiting in the tasting room," Sarah said softly. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Marchand?" Etienne nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, but remember, absolute discretion is essential." In the tasting room, Vivian sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking smaller somehow in the large leather chair. She managed a weak smile when Etienne entered with Sarah. "Miss Dupre," he said gently, "this is Sarah. She'll help collect the sample, if you're still comfortable proceeding." Vivian nodded. "Yes, of course." She reached up and carefully pulled a few strands of hair from her head, wincing slightly. Sarah placed them in the sterile container, sealed it, and labeled it precisely. "Please," Etienne said, his voice low and urgent, "don't mention this to anyone just yet. Not until we know more. There could be complications." "I understand," Vivian replied, though her eyes revealed her growing anxiety. Outside in the hallway, Maurice Leclerc paused mid-stride. He had been heading to Etienne's office for their weekly financial review when he noticed the unusual activity. Through the gap in the tasting room door, he could see Etienne speaking intently with a young woman he vaguely recognized from the previous night's gala. Maurice's eyes narrowed. In the 20 years since Colette's death, he had carefully positioned himself as Etienne's closest confidant and presumed heir to the Marchand wine empire. Any disruption to that plan was unwelcome. He watched Sarah hurry past with what looked like a medical sample container, and his jaw tightened. Something was happening, something Etienne hadn't shared with him. That hadn't happened in years. The sun was setting by the time Etienne finally left the winery, his silver Mercedes winding through the rows of grapevines. The evening light painted the leaves in shades of gold and amber, but he barely noticed the beauty around him. His mind was too full of questions, of possibilities both wonderful and terrifying. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. He pulled over to the side of the dirt road, dust settling around his car. The message glowed ominously in the growing darkness. "Stop the search. The girl knows nothing. Let it stay that way." Etienne's hands began to shake. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And they didn't want him digging into the past. He drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar turns and gates. Inside his sprawling house, he didn't bother turning on the lights. The darkness suited his mood as he stood in his kitchen, still clutching his phone, its screen now dark. The magnitude of what he faced was becoming clear. This wasn't just about discovering a possible daughter. There were forces at work here. People who had kept secrets for years. People who wanted those secrets to stay buried. The moonlight filtered through his kitchen windows, casting strange shadows on the Italian marble. Countertops. Etienne leaned against them, his normally straight shoulders bent with the weight of his thoughts. He couldn't tell Vivian about the threat. Not yet. Not until he knew more about what they were facing. The quiet of his empty house pressed in around him. For the first time in years, that emptiness felt wrong, like a choice made by others rather than by fate. He looked down at his phone one more time, at that threatening message that had shattered his sense of control. Whatever forces were moving against him, whatever secrets lay buried in his past, Etienne knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't back down. Not when the truth about family hung in the balance. Not when Vivian's life, and possibly his own, might finally make sense again. But standing there in his dark kitchen, the weight of unseen eyes upon him, Etienne realized just how dangerous this search for truth might become. Dawn had barely touched the vineyard when Etienne paced in his study, phone in hand. He had barely slept, the mysterious threat weighing heavily on his mind. Still, he couldn't let fear stop him from reaching out. With determined fingers, he dialed Vivian's number. "Hello?" Her voice was soft, still tinged with sleep. "Vivian, I apologize for calling so early," Etienne said, his formal tone softening. "I was wondering if you might join me at the vineyard today. I thought perhaps learning more about your mother's time here could help us both prepare for whatever the test results might reveal." There was a pause on the line. "I'd like that very much," Vivian replied, emotion catching in her throat. "Wonderful. Shall we say 10 o'clock?" When Vivian arrived at the vineyard that morning, the sun had warmed the earth, releasing the sweet scent of ripening grapes. Etienne waited for her at the entrance to the workers' quarters, where weathered wooden buildings housed the seasonal employees. As they walked together down the gravel path, an elderly man looking up from pruning nearby vines suddenly dropped his shears. "Mon Dieu, could it be?" he exclaimed in heavily accented English. "You look just like Marie." Vivian stopped, startled. "You knew my mother?" The old worker, Antoine, rushed forward with surprising agility for his age. "Knew her? Ah, she was the sweetest soul to ever grace these vines, always humming those beautiful French lullabies while she worked." Other workers began gathering around, drawn by Antoine's excitement. Many were in their 60s or 70s, having spent decades tending the Marchand vines. Their faces lit up with recognition and warmth. Marie's little girl. Rosa, a silver-haired woman, clasped Vivian's hands in her weathered ones. "Your mother, she would share her lunch with anyone who forgot theirs. Such a kind heart. Remember how she'd sing Au clair de la lune during the night harvests?" Another worker chimed in. Made the work feel lighter somehow. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes as the workers shared story after story. Her mother, laughing as she balanced grape baskets on her head, African style. The way she'd wrap her colourful headscarf just so, no matter how hot the day. How she would slip extra fruit to the children of other workers. Etienne stood back, watching the scene unfold. His chest tightened as he observed Vivian's face, the way her expressions mirrored Colette's, the gentle grace with which she received each memory shared. Could this remarkable young woman truly be the daughter he never knew he had? They spent the morning touring the vineyard, with different workers approaching throughout the day to share their memories. Vivian absorbed every detail, every story painting a fuller picture of the mother she'd lost too soon. Around midday, they paused for lunch in the workers' courtyard. Rosa brought them fresh bread and local cheese, insisting Vivian take the best portions. "Your mother always made sure everyone ate well," she said with a knowing smile. "It's only right we do the same for you." As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows through the vines, an elderly man approached with trembling hands. "I kept these," he said, holding out a worn packet of papers. "Marie's old notes from her time here, her beautiful handwriting. I couldn't bear to throw them away. They belong with you now." Vivian accepted the packet with reverence, running her fingers over her mother's elegant script. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you all so much." As the day drew to a close, Etienne walked Vivian to the bus stop. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, much like the rosé wines his vineyard was famous for. "I'll call you the moment the results arrive," he promised, his voice gentle but firm. "Whatever they reveal, know that you've already found a place here among people who cherished your mother." Vivian nodded, clutching the packet of notes to her chest. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It means more than I can say." The bus arrived, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Etienne watched until it disappeared around the bend, feeling both hopeful and anxious about what the coming days might bring. Later that night, Vivian sat cross-legged on her bed, a small lamp casting a warm glow over her mother's notes. She carefully unfolded each page, drinking in the familiar loops and swirls of her mother's penmanship. Here were lists of grape varieties, harvest schedules, and personal observations about the vineyard's daily rhythms. But it was more than just work notes. These pages held pieces of her mother's heart. Little doodles in the margins, snippets of poetry, even pressed grape leaves carefully preserved between the pages. Vivian traced each word with her fingertip, feeling closer to her mother than she had in years. Tomorrow might bring answers that would change everything, or nothing at all. But tonight, surrounded by these precious fragments of her mother's past, Vivian felt something settle in her soul. Whether or not the test confirmed what they suspected, she had found a piece of herself in these sun-drenched vines and the warm hearts of those who had known and loved her mother. She carefully placed the notes on her nightstand, next to the small framed photo of her mother she always kept close. The lamp cast a gentle glow over both, past and present merging in the quiet night. 2 quiet days passed like molasses dripping from a spoon. The vineyard hummed with its usual harvest preparations, while Vivian worked double shifts at her catering company, her hands constantly busy with chopping, plating, and serving. The waiting felt endless, yet neither she nor Etienne wanted to rush what might be coming. On Wednesday afternoon, Etienne's phone buzzed while he reviewed harvest reports in his office. The DNA lab's number flashed on the screen. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Monsieur Marchand, your results are ready for pickup," the technician said professionally. Etienne's hand tightened on his pen. "I'll be there within the hour." The drive to the lab felt surreal. The manila envelope sat on his passenger seat, unopened, as he navigated through evening traffic toward Vivian's apartment complex. The sun had already set, leaving behind a deep purple sky dotted with early stars. He pulled out his phone and dialed Vivian's number, which he now knew by heart. "Hello?" Her voice was tired but warm. "The results are here," he said softly. "I thought perhaps we should open them together." A pause, then, "Yes, please. I just finished my shift. I can meet you outside my building in 15 minutes. Etienne parked in the visitor's lot of the modest apartment complex, its concrete walls illuminated by flickering streetlights. The envelope seemed to pulse with possibility beside him. He watched the entrance, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. Vivian appeared a few minutes later, still wearing her black catering uniform. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, though a few strands had escaped during her long shift. Even from a distance, Etienne could see the mixture of exhaustion and anticipation on her face. As she approached his car, he caught the lingering scent of her workday, roasted vegetables and herbs clinging to her clothes. She slipped into the passenger seat, careful not to sit on the envelope. "Hi," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello," Etienne responded, equally quiet. The air in the car felt charged with emotion. They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the envelope between them. A streetlight cast a dim yellow glow through the windshield, creating long shadows across the dashboard. "Are you ready?" Etienne asked, reaching for the envelope with fingers that trembled slightly. Vivian nodded, unable to find her voice. She twisted her hands in her lap, watching as Etienne carefully broke the seal. The paper inside crinkled loudly in the quiet car. Etienne unfolded it with deliberate slowness, his eyes scanning the medical letterhead, the technical language, until they landed on the conclusion at the bottom of the page. His breath caught. The words seemed to leap off the page. Probability of biological relation, 99.9%. "It's true," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're my daughter." Vivian made a small, broken sound. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the weight of the confirmation hit her. All these years, all the questions about her father that her mother had gently deflected, all the times she'd wondered about her identity. And here was the answer, sitting beside her in a luxury car under a dim streetlight. "Why?" she sobbed, the word holding years of confusion and hurt. Why didn't she tell either of us? Etienne set the paper down and turned toward her, his own eyes glistening. "I don't know, ma petite," he said, using the endearment naturally. I wish I had known. I would have been there, every day, every moment." He reached out hesitantly, and Vivian fell into his embrace. Her tears soaked into his expensive suit jacket as she grieved, for the years lost, for her mother who had carried this burden alone, for the little girl who had always felt something missing in her life. "I'm so sorry," Etienne murmured into her hair, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I didn't know. I should have known somehow, but I didn't." They held each other, father and daughter united by paper and blood and loss, as the streetlight flickered above them. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping across the scene, but inside the vehicle time seemed suspended. Gradually, Vivian's sobs quieted. She sat back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Etienne pulled a monogrammed handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her with a sad smile. The silence that fell between them was different now, fragile but somehow hopeful, like the first tender shoots of spring breaking through winter soil. They sat together, processing the enormity of what had just changed in their lives, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by an unbreakable truth. The DNA results lay between them on the console, a simple piece of paper that had rewritten their entire world. Outside, the night deepened, and distant stars twinkled above the city lights, witnesses to this moment of revelation and reunion. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. In the quiet of the car, father and daughter simply breathed together, letting the reality of their connection settle into their bones like a long-forgotten melody, finally finding its way home. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the vineyard as Etienne's car wound its way up the private drive. Vivian sat in the passenger seat, taking in the stunning view of endless rows of grapevines stretching towards the mountains. Her father's estate appeared ahead, a beautiful stone mansion that somehow managed to look both grand and welcoming. "This is where you live?" Vivian asked softly, her eyes wide as they pulled up to the front entrance. Etienne nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. "Yes, and where your mother once visited." He parked the car and turned to her. "Are you hungry? I thought perhaps we could have breakfast together." Inside, the house was filled with natural light from tall windows. Fine art adorned the walls, but what caught Vivian's attention were the family photos, especially ones of Colette, whose resemblance to her mother was striking. Etienne led her to a warm, spacious kitchen with professional-grade appliances and a cozy breakfast nook overlooking the vineyard. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the nook. "I haven't cooked for anyone else in—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Well, not since your mother Colette passed." Vivian watched as he moved around the kitchen with surprising ease, pulling out eggs, fresh bread, and fruit. "Can I help?" she offered. "Non, ma chérie, let me do this for you." His voice was thick with emotion. In his private security office, Maurice Leclerc sat rigid in his chair, eyes fixed on the multiple screens showing different angles of Etienne's house. He had installed these cameras years ago under the guise of enhanced security, but their real purpose was to keep tabs on his business partner. Now, watching Etienne and this girl sharing breakfast, Maurice's hands clenched into fists. "This cannot be happening," he muttered, reaching for his phone to make some urgent calls. Back in the kitchen, Etienne placed 2 plates of perfectly scrambled eggs with fresh herbs, warm, crusty bread, and sliced strawberries on the table. He poured fresh coffee into delicate cups decorated with hand-painted grapevines. "Your mother, Colette, she loved these cups," he said, running his finger along the rim. "She collected them from different regions in France." They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments, the food delicious in its simplicity. Finally, Etienne cleared his throat. "We need to discuss some practical matters, Vivian. You are my daughter, which makes you my heir. There will be legal implications." Vivian set down her fork. "I don't want to cause any trouble. I'm not looking for money or position." "No," Etienne said firmly. You are my child. Everything I have built, everything I own. It is your birthright. We will need to speak with lawyers, make it official." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I have missed so many years of being your father. Please let me do this right." In his office, Maurice's face grew darker with each word he overheard through the surveillance system. Years of careful manipulation, of positioning himself as the natural successor to the Marchand wine empire, were crumbling before his eyes. He began typing furiously on his laptop, accessing financial records and legal documents. After breakfast, Etienne gave Vivian a tour of the house. Each room held history, stories, pieces of the life she might have known. But it was Colette's studio that stopped her in her tracks. The room was bathed in natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows, easels still standing with half-finished paintings, brushes arranged neatly in ceramic holders. A familiar scent caught her attention. "Lavender," she whispered. Etienne nodded, his eyes misty. Colette always kept dried lavender in here. She said it helped her think clearly while painting. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small sachet. "Even after all these years, the scent lingers." Vivian walked slowly around the room, taking in the paintings, the art supplies, the personal touches that made the space feel frozen in time. On a small table, she found a collection of photographs, including one of Colette with her mother, both women smiling, their friendship evident in their poses. They were close. Etienne said softly, "Now I understand why Colette spoke of your mother with such fondness." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I always wondered why she spent that season here alone. If only I had known." The afternoon passed quickly as they explored more of the property. Etienne showed her the wine cellars, the special vintages, the history of the Marchand family preserved in bottles and barrels. With each passing hour, Vivian felt more connected to this place, to her heritage, to the father she never knew she had. As evening approached, Etienne drove her home. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll have my lawyers begin the paperwork. You should have your rightful place in the family business." Vivian hugged him goodbye, her heart full of new possibilities. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, unaware of Maurice in his office, making calls to a private investigator named Harlan Briggs. "I need everything you can find on Vivian Dupré," Maurice was saying, his voice cold. "And I need you to make sure she understands that some doors are better left closed." He paused, looking at the security feed one last time. "Whatever it takes." The sunset painted the sky in shades of purple and gold as Vivian entered her apartment, her mind still processing the incredible day. She placed the small lavender sachet Etienne had given her on her bedside table, its gentle scent a reminder of the connection she'd found, the belonging she'd always yearned for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now she allowed herself to simply feel grateful for this gift of family she never expected to receive. The clock on Maurice's desk showed 11:37 at night as he paced his home office, phone pressed to his ear. His fingers drummed against the mahogany desk where financial reports lay scattered, each one a reminder of what he stood to lose. "I need everything," Maurice said into the phone, his voice tight with controlled fury. "School records, work history, credit reports, anything that might make her want to disappear, quietly." He paused, listening to private investigator Harlan Briggs's measured response. "No, that's not enough," Maurice snapped. "I've spent 23 years positioning myself as Etienne's successor. I won't let some unknown daughter waltz in and take everything." He grabbed a crystal tumbler, pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch. "Find something we can use. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has shame. Find hers." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for wine blending. Etienne led Vivian through the temperature-controlled cellar, explaining the science and art of creating the perfect blend. Rows of oak barrels lined the walls, their rich wooden scent mixing with the earthy aroma of aging wine. "This is something I normally only share with family," Etienne said softly, setting up the blending station. Crystal glasses caught the light from overhead, arranged in precise rows, or occasionally with master blenders who have trained for years. Vivian smoothed her apron nervously. "I don't want to mess anything up. Trust your instincts," Etienne assured her, pouring small amounts of different wines into the glasses. "Your mother, Colette, she had an exceptional palate. She could detect notes others missed entirely." They started with the basics, examining color, swirling to release aromas, taking careful sips and letting the wine coat their tongues. Etienne watched as Vivian closed her eyes, considering each taste with natural grace and concentration. "This one," she said hesitantly, pointing to the third glass. "It has something like blackberries, but also something earthy underneath." Etienne's eyes widened slightly. "Forest floor," he confirmed. "Most people miss that note entirely." He watched her work, struck by how she held each glass exactly as Colette used to, delicately, but with certainty. As they progressed through different potential blends, Vivian's natural talent became increasingly apparent. She suggested combinations that showed remarkable intuition, explaining her choices in ways that reminded Etienne so powerfully of Colette that he had to turn away once, pretending to check a barrel while blinking back tears. "Your instincts are extraordinary," he said finally, voice slightly rough. "This blend you've suggested, it's perfectly balanced, the way you've brought forward the fruit while maintaining the structure." He trailed off, overcome with pride and loss simultaneously. Vivian touched his arm gently. "Are you okay?" "Yes," he said, composing himself. "Just remembering, and grateful to be creating new memories." After they finished the blending session, they walked together along the vineyard paths. The late afternoon sun painted the grape leaves gold, casting long shadows across the rows. The air was sweet with the scent of ripening fruit. "My mother never told me about any of this," Vivian said softly. "But she always taught me about forgiveness. We went to church every Sunday, and she would say that holding on to anger only hurts yourself." Etienne nodded slowly. "And have you forgiven her for keeping this secret?" "I'm trying to understand," Vivian replied. "She must have had her reasons. The community at our church helped me learn that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to move forward with love." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Finally, Etienne spoke again. "I hope someday you can forgive me too. Even though I didn't know, I should have been there for you." "You're here now," Vivian said simply. As the sun began to set behind the hills, painting the sky in dramatic streaks of orange and purple, Etienne insisted on driving Vivian home. "The bus isn't safe this late," he said firmly, though he couldn't explain the unease that prompted the offer. They drove through the darkening evening, talking about plans for future blending sessions and Vivian's growing interest in the wine-making process. When they pulled up outside her apartment building, Etienne scanned the street instinctively. Through the gathering dusk, he noticed a dark sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted too heavily to see inside. "Text me when you're safely inside," he said, trying to keep his voice casual while making a mental note of the suspicious vehicle's make and model. Vivian gathered her things, thanking him for the wonderful day. As she climbed the steps to her building's entrance, the dark sedan's engine hummed to life. Etienne watched through his rearview mirror as the car remained stationary, its headlights still dark, waiting. The morning sun filtered through wispy clouds as Vivian prepared for what seemed like an ordinary day. She had spent yesterday catching up on rest after her double catering shift at a fancy brunch, while Etienne had been busy with lawyers working to update his estate documents. Her apartment felt peaceful, the familiar scent of coffee filling the small kitchen as she checked her phone. A text notification lit up her screen. The catering company needed someone to handle a last-minute delivery to a vineyard event. Vivian replied immediately, grateful for the extra work. She gathered her things, pulling on her black work shoes and checking that her uniform was pressed. The drive started like any other. Vivian's small blue Honda wound its way along the familiar cliffside road she had traveled countless times for catering jobs. Grapevines stretched endlessly below, their neat rows creating patterns against the valley floor. The guardrail gleamed in the morning light, a thin metal barrier between the road and the steep drop beyond. Lost in thought about her changing life, Vivian almost missed the black SUV appearing in her rearview mirror. At first it seemed normal, just another car on the road, but something felt wrong. The SUV crept closer and closer, its dark-tinted windows revealing nothing about the driver, inside. Vivian's heart began to race as the SUV suddenly accelerated, closing the gap between them with frightening speed. Before she could react, metal crunched against metal as the larger vehicle slammed into her back bumper. Her small car lurched forward violently. "Oh God, please!" Vivian whispered, knuckles white on the steering wheel as she fought to keep control. The road ahead curved sharply, hugging the cliffside. The SUV rammed her again, harder this time. Her car skidded sideways, tires screaming against the pavement as she came terrifyingly close to the guardrail. Time seemed to slow down. Vivian could see every detail with crystal clarity. The valley far below, the morning sun catching on her side mirror, the brutal black grille of the SUV filling her rearview mirror. The larger vehicle surged forward one final time, hitting her car with devastating force. The world spun. Vivian's small Honda twisted like a toy, the steering wheel jerking out of her desperate grip. There was a horrible moment of weightlessness as the car left the road, then a bone-jarring crash as it slammed into the roadside ditch. Metal groaned and glass shattered. When everything finally stopped moving, Vivian found herself trapped in the crumpled vehicle, mercifully away from the cliff's edge. Through the shattered window, she could hear voices shouting and running feet approaching. The acrid smell of burnt rubber filled her nose, mixing with the metallic tang of blood from where her head had struck the steering wheel. "Ma'am, don't move! We're calling an ambulance!" Someone was peering through her broken driver's side window. More voices joined in, concerned faces appearing above her as gentle hands reached in to help. "Can you hear me? What's your name?" A woman in running clothes had managed to get the passenger door open and was crawling carefully inside. "Vivian," she managed to whisper, her whole body shaking. "Vivian Dupré." "Stay still, Vivian. Help is coming. We've got you." The next few minutes blurred together as more people arrived. Someone had a blanket. Another person held her hand while they waited for the ambulance. The black SUV was long gone, leaving only skid marks on the pavement as evidence of its violent attack. The ambulance arrived with wailing sirens, followed quickly by police cars. As paramedics worked to carefully extract her from the wreckage, Vivian heard one of the officers interviewing witnesses. "It was definitely intentional," a man was saying. "That SUV was trying to run her off the road. No question about it." The hospital corridor seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of the ambulance. Vivian lay on a gurney, trying to process what had happened while doctors checked her for serious injuries. A nurse was gently cleaning the cut on her forehead when she heard rapid footsteps approaching. "Vivian!" Etienne's voice cracked with emotion as he burst into the emergency room, his usual composed demeanor shattered by fear. His face was pale, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd dropped everything and run the moment he got the call. "Ma chérie, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He reached for her hand, careful of the IV line and monitoring equipment. His fingers trembled as they closed around hers. "I should have known," he said, his voice thick with self-recrimination. "I felt something was wrong. I should have protected you better. This is my fault." Vivian tried to shake her head, wincing at the movement. "You couldn't have known." "But I did know something was coming. I've been receiving threats, warnings to stop looking into the past." His grip on her hand tightened. "I just didn't think they would. I never imagined they would try to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The reality of how close he had come to losing his newly found daughter too painful to voice. Tears welled up in Vivian's eyes, spilling over onto her bruised cheeks. The full weight of what had happened, what could have happened, crashed over her. Someone had tried to kill her. Not because of anything she had done, but simply because of who she was. Because of her connection to Etienne and his world. "Maybe I shouldn't stay," she whispered through her tears, each word feeling like a small betrayal of the connection they had built. "I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me." The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the quiet room as Vivian drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Etienne's form slumped in the uncomfortable visitor's chair beside her bed. He had refused to leave, even when visiting hours ended, using his influence to stay by her side through the night. In the dim glow of medical equipment, Vivian studied his sleeping face. The usual mask of careful control had slipped away, revealing worry lines around his eyes and mouth. His silver hair was tousled, his expensive suit wrinkled from spending hours in the chair. He looked older, more vulnerable, like a father who had nearly lost everything. A nurse entered quietly to check Vivian's vital signs, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. The small noise was enough to wake Etienne. He straightened immediately, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. "How is she?" he asked the nurse, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Her signs are stable," the nurse replied kindly. "The doctor will be doing rounds soon to discuss discharge." Etienne nodded, then noticed Vivian was awake. He leaned forward, taking her hand in both of his. "How are you feeling, ma chérie?" "Sore," Vivian admitted. "But okay. You didn't have to stay all night?" "Yes, I did." His grip tightened slightly. "I've already lost too many years with you. I won't let fear take away what time we have now." Tears pricked at Vivian's eyes. "But what if someone tries again? I couldn't bear it if you got hurt because of me." "Listen to me," Etienne said firmly. "You are my daughter, my flesh and blood. Nothing matters more than keeping you safe, not the vineyard, not the business, nothing. We will face this together." The doctor arrived then, clipboard in hand. After examining Vivian and reviewing her test results, she determined it was safe for Vivian to go home. "You're very lucky," she said. "Just some bruising and minor cuts. Take it easy for a few days and call if you experience any new symptoms." While Vivian changed into fresh clothes Etienne had brought from her apartment, he made several phone calls. His voice was low, but carried an unmistakable tone of authority as he arranged what needed to be done. By early evening, they had arrived at a private meeting room in one of the vineyard's stone outbuildings. Ancient oak beams crossed the ceiling, and a massive fireplace dominated one wall. Around a heavy wooden table sat Etienne's most trusted advisors, his head lawyer, the vineyard's master vintner, and 3 elderly workers who had been with the estate for decades. "Thank you all for coming," Etienne began, standing at the head of the table with Vivian beside him. "What I'm about to share must remain absolutely confidential." He laid out everything, the DNA test results proving Vivian was his daughter, the evidence that Colette had been pregnant during her mysterious absence years ago, and the threatening messages he had received since beginning to investigate the truth. The elderly workers exchanged knowing looks. One of them, Henri, spoke up in his gravelly voice. "We remember Mademoiselle Marie, Vivian's mother. She was kind to everyone, always humming those beautiful French songs. And Madame Colette. She seemed both happy and sad that summer. Now we understand why. We protected them then without knowing why," added another worker, Sophia, her weathered face fierce with determination. "We will protect Mademoiselle Vivian now, knowing she is truly one of our own." Etienne's lawyer spread out several documents, including police reports and witness statements from the attack. "We've been investigating suspicious activity around the estate," he explained. "Yesterday, multiple employees reported seeing an unknown man watching the catering facility where Vivian works. We've identified him as Harlan Briggs, a private investigator known for taking ethically questionable jobs. And guess who hired him?" Etienne's voice was cold with controlled anger. He placed a surveillance photo on the table showing Maurice Leclerc meeting with Briggs in a parking garage. "Maurice has been positioning himself as my heir for years. He must have discovered Vivian's existence and seen her as a threat to his inheritance." The room erupted in angry murmurs. Maurice had never been well liked among the long-time workers, who considered him an outsider interested only in profit. "We stand with you and Mademoiselle Vivian," Henri declared, the others nodding firmly. "Whatever you need, we are here." Plans were made, security measures discussed, and protective arrangements put in place. It was late when the meeting finally ended. Etienne insisted on driving Vivian home himself, waiting until she unlocked her apartment door before speaking. "This time," he said solemnly, his eyes full of fierce determination, "I will not fail you." The promise hung in the air between them, weighted with years of lost time and the strength of newfound family bonds that would not be broken by fear or threats. Dawn broke over the vineyard as Etienne sat in his study, reviewing the documents one final time. His lawyer had worked through the night preparing the criminal charges against Maurice, and the evidence was damning. Security footage, financial records, and witness statements painted a clear picture of betrayal and attempted harm. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, Etienne walked into the courthouse to file the charges. His steps echoed through the marble halls as he approached the clerk's desk, manila envelope in hand. The weight of years of misplaced trust pressed down on him as he signed the necessary forms. "These are serious charges, Monsieur Marchand," the clerk commented, stamping the documents. "Oui, and long overdue." Back at the vineyard, the emergency board meeting was set for 10 o'clock. Etienne arrived early, watching the members file in one by one. These were people who had known him for decades, who had watched him struggle through losing Colette, who had trusted Maurice alongside him. Their faces were grave as they took their seats in the mahogany-paneled boardroom. Maurice arrived last, his usual smooth confidence slightly ruffled. He faltered when he saw the security guards positioned at the doors, then tried to cover it with a practiced smile. "Etienne, what's this about?" Etienne didn't answer immediately. Instead, he activated the projector, displaying the first piece of evidence. Surveillance footage of Maurice meeting with the private investigator. "This," Etienne said quietly, "is about betrayal." For the next hour, he methodically presented the evidence. Bank transfers showing payments to the investigator. Phone records linking Maurice to the threatening messages. Testimony from witnesses who had seen Maurice's car near the scene of Vivian's accident. The board members' expressions shifted from shock to disgust as the truth unfolded. Maurice's face grew increasingly pale, his protests weaker with each new revelation. "You were like a brother to me," Etienne said, his voice thick with emotion. "I trusted you with everything, my business, my legacy. And you tried to destroy my daughter." "Daughter." One of the older board members leaned forward. "The young woman who was attacked?" Etienne nodded, sharing the DNA results and explaining about Colette's pregnancy. The room fell silent as the full magnitude of Maurice's actions sank in. This is absurd, Maurice sputtered. You can't possibly believe we've heard enough. The board chairman interrupted. The vote was quick and unanimous. Morris was stripped of all positions and authority, effective immediately. Security escorts waited to remove him from the premises. As Morris was led out, his face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, Etienne. All of you will. Etienne watched him go, feeling not triumph, but a deep sadness for what could have been. After the meeting, he drove to Vivian's apartment, his heart lighter knowing she would be safer now. He found her curled up on her small couch, wrapped in a soft blanket, and reading one of her mother's old journals. She looked up when he entered, her eyes questioning. It's done, he said simply, sitting beside her. Morris has been removed from the company. The police will be arresting him soon. Vivian's shoulders relaxed slightly, but worry still creased her brow. What will people say? About me, about Mama, about all of this? Etienne took her hand gently. They will say what is true, that you are my daughter, rightful heir to everything your mother and I built. The vineyard workers already love you. You've won them over with your kindness, just as your mother did. But the scandal. Vivian's voice trembled. The newspapers, the gossip. Let them talk, Etienne said firmly. We have nothing to be ashamed of. Your mother protected you the only way she knew how. Now it's my turn to protect you, openly and proudly. Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks. I just wish Mama could see this, that we found each other, that the truth finally came out. She sees, Etienne assured her, his own eyes misting. And I believe she would be proud of your strength. Later that afternoon, they walked slowly through the vineyard rows together. The vines stretched endlessly in every direction, heavy with ripening grapes. Warm, golden light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the earth. What happens next? Vivian asked, running her fingers along the rough bark of a vine. Whatever you want, Etienne replied. There's no rush. You can learn the business at your own pace, or pursue your own dreams. The important thing is that you're here, that we have time now to know each other. They paused at the top of a gentle slope, looking out over the rolling hills of grapevines. The afternoon light painted everything in soft gold and green, peaceful and full of promise. I'd like to learn, Vivian said softly. About the vines, the wine, everything. It's part of who I am, who we are. Etienne smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sunshine. Then we'll begin whenever you're ready. The vineyard has waited all these years for you. It can wait a little longer. They continued their slow walk through the rows, talking quietly about small things. Favorite wines, childhood memories, hopes for tomorrow. The vines whispered around them in the gentle breeze, as if welcoming home a long-lost daughter of the soil. The next 2 days unfolded like a gentle exhale after holding one's breath for too long. The vineyard, usually bustling with activity, seemed to wrap itself around Vivian in a protective embrace as she spent her recovery time walking its familiar paths. On the first morning, still sore from the accident but determined to heal, Vivian found herself drawn to the older section of the vineyard, where Marceline Boucher tended the heritage vines. The elderly worker's weathered hands moved with practiced grace as she carefully pruned wayward shoots, her movements a dance learned over decades of devotion to these fields. "Ah, ma petite," Marceline called out when she spotted Vivian, her face creasing into a warm smile. "Come, sit with me a while." She patted the wooden bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, where workers had taken their lunch breaks for generations. Vivian settled beside her, breathing in the earthy scent of vine and soil. "Did you really know my mother well?" she asked softly. Marceline's eyes sparkled with memory. "Your mother, she was like springtime itself, gentle but full of life." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. See? This was her favorite spot, too. The image showed Vivian's mother sitting on this very bench, her signature head wrap bright against the green leaves behind her. Her smile was radiant, one hand resting protectively over her middle, a gesture Vivian now understood with new meaning. She sang while she worked. Marceline continued, her voice warm with affection. French lullabies, gospel hymns, whatever joy was in her heart that day. The vines grew sweeter in the spots where she tended them. I swear it. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes. I feel guilty sometimes, she confessed, like I should have known somehow, should have asked more questions about our past. Marceline took Vivian's hands in her own. No, ma chérie. Your mother protected you with all the love in her heart. She wanted you to grow up free from the shadows that darkened her own path. There is no shame in that, only love. Throughout that day and the next, Marceline shared more stories, how Vivian's mother would slip extra bread to younger workers who looked hungry, how she knew every child's name in the seasonal workers' families, how her laugh could lift spirits even on the hardest days. Meanwhile, Etienne immersed himself in meetings with lawyers and financial advisors, his determination to secure Vivian's future driving him through long hours of paperwork and planning. Every few hours, though, he would find a reason to walk past wherever Vivian was spending time, checking on her with quiet concern in his eyes. During these peaceful days, other vineyard workers came forward with their own memories, each story helping to paint a fuller picture of the woman who had carried such a weighty secret. Some brought small treasures, a preserved flower Vivian's mother had pressed between pages of a work ledger, a recipe card written in her elegant script, a small sketched portrait someone had drawn of her during harvest. As dusk settled on the second evening, Etienne found Vivian sitting on the main house's wraparound porch, watching the automatic lights begin their nightly awakening across the vineyard rows. He settled into the chair beside her, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. I've been thinking about Colette, he said after a long moment of comfortable silence, about why she might have kept such a secret. Vivian turned to look at him, patient and open, allowing him space to continue. Maurice was already showing signs back then, subtle things I dismissed as ambition. Etienne's voice carried years of regret. She must have sensed what he was capable of, must have feared what he might do to protect his position. He paused, swallowing hard. She would have done anything to protect you, even if it meant protecting you from me. From Maurice's influence over you. Vivian corrected gently, reaching out to take his hand. The past doesn't have to define who we are now, who we choose to be going forward. Etienne squeezed her hand gratefully, amazed at the wisdom and forgiveness in his new-found daughter. Would you like some tea? He offered, wanting to extend this peaceful moment. Vivian nodded, and soon they sat together in companionable quiet, steam rising from delicate cups as the last light faded from the sky. The vineyard lights twinkled like earthbound stars, creating patterns across the slopes that had witnessed so much of their family's history. They didn't need many words then, their shared presence enough to bridge the years of separation. The tea's warmth seemed to spread through their hearts, healing old wounds neither had known they carried until now. In the distance, crickets began their evening song, a gentle soundtrack to this moment of found family and growing peace. Marceline, finishing her evening rounds, smiled as she passed by the porch. The sight of father and daughter sitting together, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the house windows, was like a long-awaited answer to countless prayers she had whispered over these vines through the years. Your mother would be so happy, she had told Vivian earlier that day. To see you found your way home at last. Now, watching Etienne and Vivian share this quiet moment, Marceline knew it was true. Sometimes the sweetest vintages came from vines that had weathered the hardest seasons. This family, tested by time and secrets, was finally blending into something beautiful, like the finest wines they produced, complex and rich with both history and hope. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the vineyard as workers gathered in the large meeting hall. The space hummed with quiet conversations and the scraping of wooden chairs against the floor. Etienne stood at the front, his usual formal demeanor softened by anticipation. Beside him, Vivian smoothed her navy dress nervously, her heart racing. "Good morning, everyone," Etienne began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Thank you for coming together on such short notice. I have important news to share about our family's future." The room fell silent as nearly 100 pairs of eyes focused on them. Etienne placed a gentle hand on Vivian's shoulder. "Many of you remember a special season, years ago, when my late wife Colette spent time here. Some of you also remember a kind woman who worked alongside you then, Marie Dupré." He paused as murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd. What none of us knew until now is that these two women shared a profound connection. I am both humbled and overjoyed to introduce you to my daughter, Vivian Dupré. The silence broke into a wave of warmth as workers stood up, many with tears in their eyes. Rosa, a grey-haired woman who had tended the vines for 30 years, was the first to approach. She cupped Vivian's face in weathered hands. "I see both of them in you, chérie, your mother's gentleness and Madame Colette's grace." One by one, the workers came forward. Each carried a memory to share. How Marie had helped them through difficult times, how she sang while working, how she spoke of her baby girl with such pride. An older man named Jean-Paul remembered teaching Marie about the soil composition. She wanted to understand everything. He told Vivian, his eyes crinkling with emotion. "Just like you do now." The formal announcement transformed into an impromptu celebration of remembrance. Someone brought out old photographs from the break room walls. Another worker retrieved a basket of fresh-baked bread she'd made that morning. They gathered around Vivian, sharing stories that filled in blank spaces in her history she hadn't known existed. By mid-morning, Etienne guided Vivian toward the business offices. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, noting her overwhelmed expression. "Yes," she whispered. I never expected to find so many people who knew her, who loved her." The business tour began in the main office building, where Etienne carefully explained their distribution networks across 3 continents. He showed her maps marked with their partner vineyards, spreadsheets tracking inventory, and the complex scheduling system for shipments. "We maintain relationships with restaurants and retailers in 27 countries," he explained, pointing to glowing markers on a digital display. "But more importantly, we maintain relationships with the people who make it all possible." They moved through the property, visiting the bottling facility where workers waved warmly at Vivian. The absence of Maurice's usual prowling presence was notable. The staff seemed more relaxed, their movements less hurried and anxious. In the afternoon sun, they walked the rows of vines while Etienne explained the harvest cycles. "Each grape variety has its perfect moment," he said, touching a leaf gently. "Like people, they can't be rushed. They need time, care, and understanding to reach their potential." As evening approached, Etienne led Vivian to his private office. "I found something yesterday while reorganizing some old files." He removed a worn leather journal from his desk drawer. "This belonged to your mother. I believe she would want you to have it." Vivian's hands trembled as she accepted the journal. The leather was soft with age, and a faint lavender scent still clung to its pages. "Thank you," she managed to say through the tightness in her throat. Later, in the cozy guest house room that would be hers until more permanent arrangements were made, Vivian curled up in a plush armchair by the window. The vineyard lights twinkled beyond the glass as she opened the journal with reverent care. Her mother's familiar handwriting filled the pages. Some entries were practical, notes about winemaking techniques she was learning. Others were deeply personal, filled with hopes and fears for her unborn child's future. "My dearest one," one entry read, "I dream of the day you might walk these very paths, strong and free from the shadows that darken our present. Know that every choice I make for you. Your future is as vast as these rolling hills, as bright as the morning sun on the vines. Whatever path you choose, may you always know you were loved beyond measure." Tears blurred Vivian's vision as she read page after page of her mother's thoughts, wishes, and prayers. The journal revealed a woman who was both stronger and more vulnerable than Vivian had ever known. A mother who had sacrificed everything to protect her child's chance at happiness. As sleep began to overtake her, Vivian hugged the journal to her chest. The leather was damp with grateful tears, but she couldn't let go. It was like embracing a piece of her mother's heart, finally understanding the depth of love that had shaped her life from the very beginning. The last thing she saw before drifting off was the vineyard lights beyond her window, twinkling like stars brought down to earth, watching over her first night truly home. Dawn painted the vineyard in soft watercolor hues as Vivian walked between the rows of vines. The morning air felt crisp and clean, carrying the earthy scent of soil and grape leaves. Her footsteps made gentle impressions in the dew-dampened earth as she traced paths her mother had walked decades ago. She paused to touch a cluster of ripening grapes, marveling at how much had changed in just 7 days. A week ago, she had been balancing catering trays, trying to stay invisible. Now she stood here as the heir to one of the most prestigious wineries in Napa Valley, carrying her mother's journal close to her heart. The rising sun caught the morning mist, creating halos around the vine leaves. Vivian had spent half the night reading and rereading her mother's words, each entry revealing a woman who dreamed bigger than her circumstances. Page after page spoke of helping other women find their way, especially those working in farming communities with limited opportunities. "If only I could show them their worth," her mother had written. So many bright minds and willing hands, needing just one chance to bloom. When Vivian spotted Etienne walking toward her from the main house, she knew it was time to share what had been forming in her mind since reading those words. He carried 2 steaming cups of coffee, offering one to her with a gentle smile. "You're up early," he said, his voice warm with paternal affection. "I couldn't sleep," Vivian admitted, accepting the coffee. "I've been thinking about Mom's journal, about her dreams." They walked together between the vines, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. Vivian gathered her courage and began to speak. She wrote so much about wanting to help other women, especially in agricultural communities. She explained, her voice growing stronger with conviction. I think I know what I want to do with this inheritance, this privilege I've been given." Etienne listened intently as Vivian outlined her vision for a foundation that would provide education, training, and opportunities for women in farming communities. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described programs for skill development, mentorship, and small business loans. "We could start right here," she said, gesturing to the vineyard around them. "Create apprenticeships, teaching programs, help women build futures for themselves and their families, just like Mom always wanted to do." Etienne stopped walking, and Vivian turned to see tears glistening in his eyes. He took a moment to compose himself before speaking. "Colette," he said softly, "your mother, she had the same dream. She used to talk about it for hours, planning ways to lift up other women. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. She would be so proud to see you carrying that vision forward. His voice strengthened with determination. You'll have my full support, financial backing, business connections, whatever you need. We'll make this happen together. Vivian felt tears of her own spilling over as they embraced, father and daughter united in purpose. Later that afternoon, Etienne led Vivian to the private cellaring room, a sacred space where the vineyard's most precious wines were stored. Crystal glasses lined the walls, catching light from antique chandeliers. In the center stood a traditional oak barrel, specially reserved for family celebrations. This is our ceremonial bottling, Etienne explained, his voice reverent. We do this only for the most important family milestones, births, marriages, moments that shape our legacy. He smiled at her. Today we celebrate you coming home. He showed her the careful process, how to draw the wine from the barrel, how to handle each bottle with respect. Together they worked in comfortable silence, filling bottles that would rest in the cellar until future harvest celebrations. Vivian's hands moved with natural grace as she sealed each bottle, understanding the weight of tradition in every motion. She thought of future generations who might open these bottles, remembering this day when their family grew whole again. As evening settled over the vineyard, they shared dinner in Etienne's residence. Candlelight softened the dining room's formal lines as they enjoyed a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables. Their conversation flowed easily between French and English, touching on deep subjects: faith, forgiveness, hopes for tomorrow. I've learned so much about forgiveness in my church community, Vivian shared, thinking of Sunday mornings filled with gospel music and warm embraces. They taught me that healing comes when we stop carrying the weight of what we can't change. Etienne nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that's what we're both learning now, to forgive the past and focus on the good we can do going forward. They talked about the foundation, sketching preliminary plans on paper napkins. Etienne's business expertise complemented Vivian's compassionate vision, their different strengths weaving together naturally. As night fell over the vineyard, Vivian made her way back to the guest house. Stars emerged above the rolling hills, and lights twinkled from distant homes. She felt steady, grounded in a way she had never known before. The path ahead was clear, not just a career or an inheritance, but a purpose that honored both her mother's dreams. Inside her room, she placed her mother's journal on the bedside table, touching its worn cover gently. For the first time since discovering her true identity, Vivian felt completely ready to step into this new life, not just as Etienne's heir, but as someone who could make a real difference in others' lives. She changed into comfortable pajamas and sat by the window, watching the vineyard settle into night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight she rested in the peace of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. Dawn painted the vineyard in soft golden light as workers gathered beneath the ancient oak tree, its sprawling branches creating a natural cathedral in the early morning air. This tree had witnessed generations of vineyard celebrations, its thick trunk scarred and weathered by time, yet still standing strong like the family legacy it represented. Wooden chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, decorated with simple white ribbons and sprigs of lavender. The morning dew still clung to the grass, and the air carried the sweet scent of ripening grapes from the surrounding vines. Workers arrived quietly, dressed in their Sunday best, carrying small bouquets of wildflowers and wearing expressions of reverent joy. Marceline Boucher moved among them, directing the final arrangements with grandmother-like authority. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and she wore a carefully pressed dress that spoke of the occasion's importance. She had helped organize countless ceremonies beneath this oak, but this one held special meaning: the return of a lost daughter, the healing of an old wound. Vivian arrived wearing a simple white dress, her hands trembling slightly as she walked toward the gathering. Etienne stood waiting for her, tall and dignified in his dark suit, his eyes bright with emotion. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, highlighting the years that had brought them to this moment. The ceremony began with Marceline leading a traditional blessing in French, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Workers who had known Vivian's mother wiped tears from their eyes, remembering the young woman who had once walked these same paths, carrying the secret of her unborn child. Etienne stepped forward, his presence commanding yet gentle. He faced the gathered workers, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly visible on his face. "Today," he began, "we celebrate a miracle. For years I believed that life had given me all the joy and sorrow it could offer. I had success, yes, but also deep loss." He paused, collecting himself. "I thought I knew the shape of my days to come. But life?" He smiled, looking at Vivian. Life had other plans. His voice strengthened as he continued. "In Vivian, I have found not just my daughter, but a reminder that truth, no matter how long buried, finds its way to light. Her mother, Colette, left us too soon, but she left behind a love so strong it bridges generations. Through Vivian, I see Colette's spirit, her kindness, her strength." Tears flowed freely down Vivian's cheeks as she listened, her heart full to bursting. Around her, workers nodded and smiled, many remembering Colette's gentle presence in the vineyard years ago. "It takes courage," Etienne continued, "to face truth when it appears unexpectedly. Vivian has shown that courage, stepping into a new life with grace and openness. Together, we will honor Colette's memory by building a future she would have been proud of." As he finished speaking, Marceline stepped forward with a small wooden box. Inside lay an old key on a silver chain, the traditional symbol of vineyard inheritance. Etienne lifted it carefully and placed it around Vivian's neck, his hand steady despite his emotion. "Welcome home, my daughter," he said softly, and the gathered workers burst into applause. One by one, they came forward to embrace Vivian, offering blessings in French and English, sharing memories of her mother, welcoming her into their extended family. Old men who had worked the vines for decades clasped her hands in gnarled fingers, whispering prayers of blessing. Women who had known Colette hugged her tight, their tears mingling with hers. After the ceremony, Etienne led Vivian to his office for a series of important video calls. On large screens, business partners and board members from around the world appeared, each one formally introduced to Vivian as Etienne's daughter and heir. She handled each introduction with natural grace, her French as elegant as her English, earning approving nods from the executives. The afternoon transformed into a quiet celebration as Marceline and other long-time staff prepared a feast in the main house kitchen. Delicious aromas filled the air, traditional French dishes mixed with local California ingredients, creating a fusion that represented Vivian's own heritage. Workers came and went throughout the day, sharing meals in shifts so the vineyard work could continue. Stories flowed as freely as wine, tales of harvests past, of Colette's kindness, of hope for the future. Vivian absorbed each one, building a picture of the mother she had lost and the community she had gained. As evening approached, the celebration wound down naturally, workers returning to their homes or evening shifts. The kitchen was filled with the comfortable sounds of cleanup, staff insisting that Vivian and Etienne relax on the porch while they handled the dishes. Fireflies began to appear as dusk settled over the vineyard, their tiny lights dancing between the vines like earthbound stars. Vivian and Etienne sat side by side on the wide porch, watching the day fade into twilight. The key around Vivian's neck caught the last rays of sunlight, a tangible symbol of her new place in this world. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender and grapevines, reminiscent of the perfume Colette used to wear. Etienne reached over and took Vivian's hand, his touch gentle and paternal. "Your mother would be proud of you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Vivian felt tears well up again, but they were tears of peace now, of belonging. She leaned her head against her father's shoulder, feeling the steady strength of his presence. Together they watched the fireflies dance, two hearts healing in the quiet evening air, bound by the love of the woman who had brought them together across time and loss. The vineyard settled around them, ancient and alive, witnessing this new chapter in its long history. Workers' voices drifted from distant buildings, the last tasks of the day being completed. In this moment, everything felt right, past and present, loss and discovery, all woven together into a tapestry of family and hope. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the vineyard as Vivian walked between the rows of vines, her footsteps soft on the damp earth. Dawn had barely broken, but she couldn't sleep any longer, her heart too full of peace and possibility. Dew sparkled on the grape leaves, catching the light like tiny diamonds, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of ripening fruit. She traced her fingers along the rough bark of the vines, marveling at how familiar they already felt. These past weeks had transformed her world completely, yet somehow everything made perfect sense now. The uncertainty that had shadowed her life for so long had lifted, replaced by a sense of belonging she'd never known before. Her path led her naturally to the ancient oak tree where yesterday's ceremony had taken place, its massive branches spread wide against the morning sky, leaves rustling softly in the breeze. This tree had witnessed generations of vineyard history, including her mother's secret visits so many years ago. Vivian placed her hand against the oak's weathered trunk, feeling its steady strength. The key around her neck caught the sunlight, warm against her skin. Looking up through the branches, she spoke softly in French, her mother's language that now felt like a precious inheritance. "Maman, je suis à la maison," she whispered. "Maman, I'm home." The words settled in her heart like a final piece clicking into place. She could almost feel her mother's presence in the morning air, proud and loving, at peace with the truth finally being known. Meanwhile, in his office, Etienne sat at his desk reviewing paperwork with careful attention. Legal documents for Vivian's foundation spread across the polished surface, each page representing a step toward making her dream reality. The initiative would support women in agricultural communities, offering education, mentorship, and opportunities for advancement, exactly what Colette had once hoped to create. But the foundation wasn't his only focus this morning. A separate folder held the final permits and renovations plans for what he considered his most important project: Vivian's cottage. The small stone building near the heart of the vineyard had stood empty for years, but now it practically hummed with new life. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new windows welcomed the morning light, and carefully chosen furnishings waited beneath protective covers. Etienne smiled as he thought of the surprise ahead. The cottage would give Vivian her own space on the vineyard grounds while she learned the business, a place to build her new life while staying close to family. He hoped she would see it as the welcome home it was meant to be. The morning passed quickly as Vivian familiarized herself with more of the vineyard operations. She sat in on a meeting with the harvest coordinators, absorbing information about timing and techniques. Workers greeted her warmly as she passed, no longer surprised to see her among the vines. This was where she belonged now. By early afternoon, Etienne could barely contain his excitement. He found Vivian in the tasting room, where she was studying vintage charts with focused attention. "Come with me," he said, unable to keep the smile from his face. "I have something to show you." They walked together along the winding path that led through the heart of the vineyard. Grape-laden vines stretched in every direction, creating a peaceful corridor of green and purple. As they rounded a gentle curve, the cottage came into view. It sat nestled among old olive trees, its stone walls glowing warmly in the afternoon sun. Window boxes overflowed with lavender, Colette's favourite, and a small garden waited for Vivian's touch. A wooden sign beside the door read, Maison de Vivian, in elegant script. "This is yours," Etienne said softly, holding out a key. "You're home here, whenever you're ready." Vivian stood frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. She took the key with trembling fingers and slowly approached the cottage. Inside, sunlight streamed through new windows onto hardwood floors. The rooms were beautifully furnished, but not overwhelming, a perfect blend of comfort and elegance. A small desk stood in one corner, positioned to overlook the vineyard. The kitchen held professional-grade equipment, ready for her culinary experiments. Everything spoke of thoughtful consideration for who she was and who she might become. Overcome with emotion, Vivian turned and threw her arms around Etienne, hugging him tight. "Merci, Papa," she whispered, the word Papa falling naturally from her lips for the first time. Etienne held her close, his own eyes filling with tears at the sound of that precious word. For so long he had lived with an emptiness he couldn't name, and now here was his daughter, filling his world with light again. They spent the next hour exploring the cottage together, Etienne explaining various features while Vivian discovered small touches that made it uniquely hers. A wine rack waited to be filled with her own favorite vintages. Bookshelves stood ready for her collection. Everything spoke of permanence, of belonging, of home. Last of all, Vivian took her mother's journal from her bag. The worn leather cover felt warm in her hands as she placed it carefully on the cottage windowsill. Sunlight fell across its pages, illuminating years of hopes and dreams that were finally coming true in ways her mother could never have imagined. Together, father and daughter stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. They stood side by side, watching the celestial show unfold over their vineyard, their shared legacy. The future stretched before them like the endless rows of vines, rich with possibility and hope. The foundation, the cottage, their growing bond. All of it felt like healing, like promises kept and love restored. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, strengthened by truth and guided by Colette's enduring love. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.